Hello everybody and welcome to my monthly Vietnam update. In November, the Vietnamese benchmark index declined by 1.3% in US dollar terms, partly driven by a slight depreciation of the Vietnamese dong against the US dollar, following Trump's election victory, which strengthened the US dollar against most other currencies as investors expect a robust US economic growth under his leadership. Despite the broader market setback, the AFC Vietnam Fund outperformed the VN Index, with its NAV increasing slightly by 0.1% according to internal estimates. Hi, my name is Andreas Vogelsanger. I'm the CEO of the AFC Vietnam Fund.
Welcome back, everybody. Today's deep dive takes us all the way to Southeast Asia. We'll be exploring Vietnam's economic landscape, and we've got some really fascinating research and articles here.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on over there.
Yeah, things are heating up, especially for investors.
For sure.
I mean, think Vietnam surpassing China in furniture exports, a potential AI boom, and this massive high-speed rail project in the works.
Ambitious.
Super ambitious. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's rewind a bit and look at the recent U.S. presidential election, Trump's second term. How might that impact Vietnam? What are we thinking?
Well, it's actually pretty interesting. Vietnam actually did really well economically during Trump's first term.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And a lot of that can be tied back to those tariffs on Chinese goods. Remember those?
Yeah.
Well, they kind of ended up being a bit of a blessing in disguise for Vietnam.
Okay, I'm listening.
So basically, companies started shifting production away from China to avoid those tariffs. And Vietnam became a prime destination for a lot of that foreign direct investment.
So Vietnam basically benefited from the trade war.
Exactly. And this trend, well, it's expected to continue, even with the possibility of new tariffs on Vietnamese goods.
Okay, so the tariffs might not be a deal breaker.
Well, it's because they're expected to be much lower than those on Chinese products. So that means Vietnam can stay pretty competitive.
That's fascinating. But what about the potential downsides? I mean, Trump is known for his protectionist policies, right?
Yeah, there are definitely some risks there. Trump might pressure Vietnam to buy more American-made products, which could strain their budget a bit. It's kind of a tightrope walk for them, balancing the opportunities with these potential challenges.
It sounds like a really delicate situation.
Yeah.
But I'm hearing Vietnam is showing some real economic resilience here. They're navigating all this global uncertainty and even finding ways to benefit from it.
Absolutely. And, this resilience is attracting a lot of attention, especially from investors.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Why is Vietnam's economy, and specifically its stock market, why are they looking so attractive right now? What's driving all this interest?
Well, I think it's important to note that Vietnam is really moving beyond its traditional image as just a manufacturing hub.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that.
They are making some serious moves in the tech world, and that's what's really turning heads.
Yeah, I've heard whispers of this. What kind of tech investments are we talking about here?
We're talking about major players like SpaceX. They're investing, get this, $1.5 billion in their Starlink project in Vietnam. Samsung is expanding its semiconductor research and development in Ho Chi Minh City. And even, you're not going to believe this, the Trump Organization has poured $1.5 billion into the country.
Wow, okay. So what is it about Vietnam that's attracting these big tech giants?
Well, a lot of it comes down to Vietnam's workforce. They've got a young, highly skilled, and affordable engineering workforce.
Okay, and that's attractive for these companies, obviously.
Very attractive. It makes Vietnam a really strong option for companies that are looking to set up research and development centers and even manufacturing facilities.
So Vietnam is becoming a global tech hub, essentially. What does this mean for investors who are interested in Vietnam?
I mean, it has huge implications for global supply chains, for innovation, and potentially even for individual investment portfolios. It's something to keep an eye on, that's for sure.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about how investors can actually, put their money where their mouth is. How can investors capitalize on Vietnam's potential? What's the best way to play the Vietnam game?
Well, now we're getting to the interesting part. If you look at the Vietnamese stock market, there's a strong case to be made for active management. Instead of those passive ETFs.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, the Vietnamese market has some unique characteristics that actually make active strategies much more appealing.
I'm all ears. Tell me about these unique characteristics.
Sure. So For starters, Vietnam has foreign ownership limits on many of its listed companies. This can be a real headache for ETFs.
Okay, so those ETFs are trying to track an index.
Right. They can really struggle to replicate the performance of the VN index, which is Vietnam's benchmark stock index.
Right, so the ETFs might hit some roadblocks. They might not be able to fully capture the market's potential.
Exactly. Active funds, though, they have the flexibility to get around these restrictions. They can choose stocks strategically, they can use information that isn't widely available, and they can adjust their portfolios on the fly to take advantage of opportunities that the ETFs might miss.
So experience and local knowledge are really key here when it comes to investing in Vietnam.
Absolutely. In a market like Vietnam with, all these unique rules and complexities, having an experienced active manager, someone who gets it, it can make a huge difference.
So if someone is seriously considering tapping into Vietnam's economic potential, you're saying go with an experienced active fund, focus on Vietnam, skip the passive ETF route.
Yeah, I think that's the smarter move. Of course, thorough research and due diligence are always important, but in Vietnam's case, the active approach just makes a lot more sense. It's pretty interesting to see how Vietnam's stock market, how it's been reacting to all this. Remember, right after Trump got reelected, the VN index dipped a little bit.
Right.
Not a huge drop,
Yeah.
only about 1.3% in USD terms, but definitely got people's attention.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, a second term for a president known for kind of unpredictable trade policies would definitely make people a little nervous.
Yeah, for sure. And it wasn't just Trump, actually. There was something else going on, something that kind of spooked local investors and triggered a sell-off in bank stocks.
Oh, okay. Now I'm really curious. What was that?
Well, it all goes back to a speech by Mrs. Hong. She's the governor of the State Bank of Vietnam.
Okay.
And she mentioned that the state bank was getting ready to support borrowers who had been affected by Typhoon Yagi.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty reasonable response to a natural disaster. Why would that cause a sell-off?
Well, it was a classic case of the market overreacting, fueled by some, misinformation.
Okay.
You see, there's this policy called Circular O2. Basically, it lets commercial banks keep their current level of non-performing loans. Gives them a little breathing room, when times are tough.
Okay, so investors were worried that this new support package, this one for typhoon victims, that it might mean the end of Circular O2.
Exactly. Rumors started flying around on social media that the state bank was planning to just scrap Circular O2 altogether.
Wow.
Investors panicked, worried about a possible surge in bad loans and, just general instability in the banking sector.
Ah, the joys of social media speculation. So was there any truth to these rumors?
Nope, not at all. The state bank never even suggested that they were ending Circular O2. It was pure speculation, investors jumping to conclusions and letting fear take over.
Wow. It just goes to show, even in a booming economy like Vietnam's, market sentiment can be fragile. It doesn't take much to set off a panic.
It really doesn't, and it highlights how important it is to understand the fundamentals. You can't let those short-term market swings dictate your investment strategy.
It seems like Vietnam's economic resilience, it goes way beyond just navigating these trade wars and attracting foreign investment. They're dealing with natural disasters and market volatility, too.
That's a great point. Vietnam has an incredible ability to adapt and overcome challenges. It's part of what makes them such an attractive investment destination.
Speaking of challenges, let's talk about Trump's trade policies. How might his second term impact Vietnam?
Well, as we were talking about earlier, those tariffs on Chinese goods, they actually helped Vietnam during Trump's first term. But there's always a chance he could shift his focus to Vietnam now that he's been reelected.
So the tariffs that were a blessing before, could they become a bit of a curse now?
It's possible. Vietnam's growing trade surplus with the U.S. makes them a potential target for those protectionist policies. If Trump decides to put tariffs on Vietnamese goods, well, it could definitely put a damper on their export growth and slow down their economic momentum a bit.
So trade tensions with the U.S. are a legitimate risk for Vietnam.
Yes, it's something investors need to be aware of. That comprehensive strategic partnership between the U.S. and Vietnam, it might help reduce some of that risk, but there are no guarantees.
So it's a bit of a balancing act for Vietnam, right? They've got to maintain those strong trade relations with the U.S., but they also need to diversify their economy and reduce their reliance on exports.
Absolutely. And that's where their investments in things like technology and infrastructure come in.
Right. We talked about the tech boom earlier, but we haven't really touched on their infrastructure plans. What's happening there?
Oh, well, Vietnam has some really impressive infrastructure projects going on, most notably the North-South high-speed railway.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about that. It's a huge project, right?
Oh, yeah, it's massive. Imagine a high-speed train taking you from the north of Vietnam all the way down to the south.
Wow.
At 350 kilometers per hour, that's the vision. It's a dual-track railway over 1,500 kilometers long with state-of-the-art technology.
That's incredibly impressive, but what does a high-speed railway have to do with Vietnam's economic resilience?
It's not just about moving people around quickly, it's about stimulating economic growth across all different kinds of sectors. Think construction companies, engineering firms, material suppliers, technology providers. This project will create a ripple effect throughout the entire country.
So it's a catalyst for broader economic development, basically.
Exactly. It's a big part of Vietnam's strategy to become a more developed and prosperous nation.
It sounds like they're really thinking long term. These projects must come with a pretty big price tag, though.
Oh, they do. The high-speed railway is estimated to cost about $67.34 billion.
Wow.
That's roughly 16.5% of Vietnam's GDP.
That is a huge investment. Where's all that money coming from?
Well, the plan is to invest about 2% of their annual budget for the next 8 years.
Wow.
It's a big commitment, but the potential rewards are enormous.
It's a bold move, but if they can pull it off, it could really transform their economy.
Absolutely. And it's just one example of Vietnam's commitment to improving its infrastructure. They're also investing heavily in roads, ports, airports, all to make them more connected and competitive.
It sounds like they're laying the groundwork for continued economic growth and attracting even more foreign investment.
That's exactly right. Vietnam is really putting themselves on the map as a major player in the global economy. They're not just going with the flow, they're creating their own wave.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about Trump, the tech boom, the infrastructure investments, the stock market. Vietnam is a dynamic and growing economy, that's for sure. But it's also complex. There are definitely risks.
You summed it up perfectly. Vietnam is not the place for passive investors. You need to do your research, you need to understand the nuances of the market, and you need to be willing to put in the work.
So for those who are willing to put in the effort, what are some key takeaways they should keep in mind?
Well, the main takeaway is that Vietnam is a growth story. They have shown incredible resilience in the face of global uncertainty, and their economic fundamentals are very strong.
So there's reason to be optimistic about their future.
Absolutely. But optimism should always be balanced with, some healthy caution. The trade tensions with the U.S., the need to manage growth in a sustainable way, the complexities of the stock market, these are all things investors need to carefully consider.
It sounds like Vietnam offers a really interesting blend of opportunities and challenges, making it a pretty compelling but also a nuanced investment destination.
Exactly. If you're willing to dig deeper, understand the complexities, and think long term, Vietnam has the potential to deliver some really great rewards.
That's a great point. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay, imagine yourself in the heart of Ho Chi Minh City, surrounded by all the energy and ambition of this amazing place.
I can picture it.
Now ask yourself this. Given where Vietnam is headed, given their unique blend of energy and resilience, how do you think this evolving landscape is going to change things? I mean, how will it reshape global trade? How will it impact technological innovation? And how will it even change the way you think about investment opportunities in the years to come?
That's a big question.
It is a big question.
One that I think is worth some serious thought.
Definitely. And with that, we'll bring this deep dive to a close. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of Vietnam's economic landscape. I hope this has given you some valuable insights and a new appreciation for this dynamic and evolving nation.
It's been great being here. It really is amazing to see how Vietnam has captured the attention of so many investors. I mean, it's for good reason. They've handled some really tough challenges. They've become a real economic force.
Yeah, and it doesn't look like they're slowing down anytime soon.
Not at all. They're really focused on infrastructure, embracing technology, and they've got a smart approach to trade. It all points to continued growth for years to come.
We've talked about it, but it's not all easy. There are those risks, especially with the trade situation with the U.S. and making sure their growth is sustainable.
Absolutely. Investing in Vietnam means you need to understand both the good and the bad. It's not a place for those who aren't ready for some ups and downs.
So what would you say to someone thinking about adding Vietnam to their investment portfolio?
First thing, do your research. Don't just follow the crowd because everyone's talking about Vietnam. Really understand the country, its economy, its politics, what drives its growth, and what the potential risks are.
That's great advice. Knowledge is key, especially when it comes to investments.
For sure. I'd also say it's important to think long term. Vietnam's story is still being written. There will be bumps in the road, but if you're patient and you have a plan, the potential rewards could be really impressive.
So we need to look past those short-term market changes and focus on the bigger picture.
Exactly. Vietnam's a marathon, not a sprint.
And we can't forget what we talked about earlier. Active management seems to do better than passive strategies in Vietnam's market. Finding an experienced active fund manager, someone who really understands the ins and outs of this market, could be a real game changer.
Totally agree. Having someone who can work around those foreign ownership limits, use insider information, and change their portfolio quickly, that can make a huge difference in getting the best returns.
It sounds like Vietnam is a really interesting place to invest, potentially very rewarding, but you have to do your homework and be strategic.
That's it in a nutshell. It shows what resilience, adaptability, and ambition can achieve. Vietnam's a great example of how a country can change its economic future by embracing change and going after opportunities.
Well said. I think we've really explored a lot today and given our listeners a good look at Vietnam's economy.
I hope so. It's been great sharing these insights with you.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the world of economics and investing. We'll see you next time.